listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Happy Monday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come over and watch the video simulcast and join the live chat room with the other Intrepids over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, my channel has finally been monetized, so you might have to endure a couple of YouTube ads, but that's okay. Hopefully, one day, that could help pay the bills. So I appreciate the fact that we are at that stage. So come on over and join us and enjoy today's program. We've been talking about, as you know, Native America, and last week we left off on kind of a culmination point that a lot of people were looking forward to hearing, and that was the Battle of the Greasy Grass, or as we know it in American culture, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And as we also know it, it involved Custer's Last Stand, where General George Armstrong Custer was killed, along with 262 other soldiers of the 7th Cavalry. And I'm going to recap just a little bit. So we had this battle that took place. There were several Indians who, in their accounts, took personal claim of killing Custer on the battlefield. Yet, Sitting Bull gave probably one of the more accurate ones. In an interview given in Canada a year after the battle, Sitting Bull said that he never even saw Custer, but that other Indians had seen and recognized him just before he was killed. He didn't wear his hair as he used to wear it, Sitting Bull said. It was short, but its color, it was the color of the grass when the frost comes. So, you know, that straw blonde color. And where the last stand was made, the long hair stood like a sheaf of corn, with all the ears fallen around him. But Sitting Bull didn't say who actually killed Custer. If he knew, he didn't share that information. An Arapaho warrior who had been riding with the Cheyenne said that Custer was killed by several Indians. He was dressed in buckskin, a coat and pants, and he was on his hands and knees, and he'd been shot through the side, and there was blood coming from his mouth. He seemed to be watching the Indians moving around him. 4 soldiers were sitting up around him, but they were all badly wounded, and other soldiers were down. Then the Indians closed in around him, and I did not see any more. So said this the Cheyenne warrior. And this was a quote taken from the book The Custer Myth by W.A. Graham, and it was published in 1953. So, folks, as that all came to an end, and we talked about it last Friday, regardless of who killed Custer, the long hair who had made the thieves' road into the Black Hills was dead with all his men. And Reno's soldiers, however, reinforced by those of Major Frederick Benteen, were dug in on a hill farther down the river. The Indians surrounded the hill completely and watched the soldiers through the night, and the next morning started fighting them again. These were Custer's backup that never made it to help. And during the day, scouts sent out by the chiefs came back with warnings of many more soldiers marching in the direction of the Little Bighorn. And so after a council, it was decided to break camp. The warriors had expended most of their ammunition, and they knew it would be foolish to try to fight so many soldiers with only bows and arrows. So the women were told to begin packing, and before sunset, they started up the valley toward the Bighorn Mountains, the tribes separating along the way and taking different directions. Now, as you can imagine, when the white men in the East heard of the Longhairs' defeat, they called it a massacre, and they went crazy with anger. They wanted to punish all the Indians in the West. And because they couldn't punish Sitting Bull and the war chiefs, the Great Council in Washington, Congress, decided to punish the Indians they could find, those who remained on the reservations and had actually taken no part in the fighting at all. And on July 22nd, the great warrior Sherman received authority to assume military control of all the reservations in the Sioux country and to treat the Indians there as prisoners of war. And on August 15th, the Great Council, Congress, made a new law requiring the Indians to give up all rights to the Powder River country and the Black Hills. They did this without regard to the Treaty of 1868, maintaining that the Indians had violated the treaty by going to war with the United States. And this was difficult for the reservation Indians to understand because they had not attacked the United States soldiers, nor had Sitting Bull's followers attacked them until Custer sent Reno charging through the Sioux villages. So to keep the reservation Indians peaceful, the Great Father, the President of the United States, sent out a new commission in September, another commission, to cajole and threaten the chiefs and secure their signatures to legal documents transferring immeasurable wealth of the Black Hills to white ownership. And several members of this commission were old hands at stealing Indian lands, notably Newton Edmonds, Bishop Henry Whipple, and the Reverend Samuel D. Hinman. And at the Red Cloud Agency, Bishop Whipple opened the proceedings with a prayer. And then Chairman George Manypenny read the conditions laid down by Congress. And because these conditions were stated in the usual obfuscated language of lawmakers, Bishop Whipple attempted to explain them in phrases which could be used by the interpreters. Pardon my cloudy voice today. Now, my heart has for many years been very warm toward the red man, said Whipple. We came here to bring a message to you from the Great Father. And there are certain things we have given to you in his exact words. We cannot alter them even to the scratch of a pen. When the Great Council made the appropriation this year to continue your supplies, they made certain provisions, 3 in number, and unless they were complied with, no more appropriations would be made by Congress. Those 3 provisions are, first, that you shall give up the Black Hills country and the country to the north of it. Second, that you should receive your rations on the Missouri River. And third, that the Great Father shall be permitted to locate 3 roads from the Missouri River across the reservation to the new country where the Black Hills are. The Great Father said that his heart was full of tenderness for his red children, and he selected this commission of friends of the Indians that they might devise a plan as he directed them. So in order that the Indian nations might be saved. Saved from what, I would ask? Saved from the aggression of the United States if they didn't comply. And that instead of growing smaller and smaller until the last Indian looks upon his own grave, they might become as the white man has become, a great and powerful people. This is what Whipple said. Now, this is part of documents that you can find in the U.S. Congress, the 44th and the 2nd session. It's a Senate executive document. So, to Bishop Whipple's listeners, this seemed a strange way to indeed save the Indian nations, taking away their Black Hills, taking away their hunting grounds, and moving them far away to the Missouri River. Most of the chiefs knew that it was already too late to save the Black Hills. but they protested strongly against having their reservations moved to the Missouri. "I think if my people should move there," Red Cloud said, "they would all be destroyed. There are a great many bad men there and bad whiskey. Therefore, I don't want to go there." This was Red Cloud's protest. And that was in the New York Herald, the September 3rd, 1876 edition. That quote was given. Now, Nohart said that the white men had already ruined the Missouri River country so that Indians couldn't even live there. "You travel up and down the Missouri River and you do not see any timber," he declared. "You have probably seen where lots of it has been, and the Great Father's people have destroyed it." That was Nohart. "It is only 6 years since we came to live on this stream where we are living now," Red Dog said, "and nothing has been promised that has been promised us has ever been done in 6 years' time." And another chief remembered that since the Great Father promised them that they would never be moved, they had been moved 5 times. "I think you had better put the Indians on wheels," he said sardonically, "and you can run them about whenever you wish." How's that for an answer? "I think you should put all the Indian people on wheels so you can just move us where you want us at any given whim." Spotted Tail accused the government and the commissioners of betraying the Indians, of broken promises and false words. He said, "This war did not spring up here in our land. This war was brought upon us by the children of the Great Father, who came to take away our land from us without price, and who in our land do a great many evil things. This war has come from robbery, from stealing of our land." As for moving to the Missouri, Spotted Tail was utterly opposed to this. He told the commissioners he would not sign away the Black Hills until he could go to Washington and talk to the Great Father. The commissioners gave the Indians a week to discuss the terms amongst themselves, and soon it became very evident that they weren't going to sign anything. And the chiefs pointed out that the Treaty of 1868 required the signatures of 3/4 of the male adults of the Sioux tribes to change anything in it, and more than half the warriors were in the North with Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. In reply to this, the commissioners explained that the Indians off-reservation were considered hostiles. They didn't need their signatures. Only friendly Indians were covered by the treaty. So most of the chiefs, as you can well imagine, didn't accept this at all. To break down their opposition, the commissioners dropped strong hints that unless they signed, the Great Council in its anger would cut off all rations immediately. They'd remove them to the Indian Territory in the South, and the army would take all their guns and all their horses. So, either sign this peaceably or we'll take it all by force anyway. That's what the commission is telling them. There was no way out. The Black Hills were stolen. The Powder River country and its herds of wild game were gone. Without wild game or rations, the people would starve. And the thought of moving far away to a strange country in the South was unbearable. And if the army took their guns and ponies, they would no longer be men. Red Cloud and all his sub-chiefs signed first. Remember Red Cloud? He's the guy that stood out. He's the guy that negotiated. He's the guy that walked out on commissions and got what he wanted. But now he's seeing the handwriting on the wall. So Red Cloud and his sub-chiefs were the first to sign. And then Spotted Tail and his people signed. And after that, the commissioners went to agencies at Standing Rock. You remember Standing Rock from recent history, recent events, the pipeline going through Standing Rock Reservation and the standoff there a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. Cheyenne, so they went to Standing Rock, they went to Cheyenne River, they went to Crow Creek, Lower Brule, and Santee, and badgered the other Sioux tribes into signing. Thus did Pahasapa, its spirits, its mysteries, its vast pine forests, and its $1 billion in gold passed forever from the hands of the Indians into the domain of the United States. 4 weeks after Red Cloud and Spotted Tail touched pens to paper, 8 companies of United States cavalry under Three Fingers Mackenzie, the Eagle Chief who destroyed the Kiowas and the Comanches in Palo Duro Canyon, marched out of Fort Robinson into the agency camps. Under orders of the War Department, Mackenzie had come to take all the reservation Indians' ponies and guns. All males were placed under arrest, teepees were searched and dismantled, guns collected, and all ponies were rounded up by the soldiers. Didn't they tell them that if you didn't sign, this is what would happen? But they did sign, and now this is still happening. The males, including Red Cloud and the other chiefs, were forced to walk to the fort. The tribe would have to live henceforth at Fort Robinson under the guns of the soldiers. Next morning, to degrade his beaten prisoners even further, Mackenzie presented a company of mercenary Pawnee scouts, the same Pawnees the Sioux had once driven out of their Powder River country, with the horses that the soldiers had taken from the Sioux. So they gave all their horses to the Pawnee. Meanwhile, the United States Army, thirsting for revenge, was prowling the country north and west of the Black Hills, killing Indians wherever they could be found. In late summer of 1876, this is only within 6 to 8 weeks of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, 3 Stars Crook's reinforced column ran out of rations in the Heart River country of Dakota and started a forced march southward to obtain supplies in the Black Hills mining camps. And on September 9th, near Slim Buttes, a forward detachment under Captain Anson Mills stumbled upon American Horse's village of Oglalas and Minneconjou. American Horse, that was the name of this particular chief. Now, these Indians had left Crazy Horse's camp on the Grand River a few days before and were moving south to spend the winter on their reservation. Captain Mills attacked them, but the Sioux drove him back. And while he was waiting for 3 Stars to arrive, all the Indians escaped except American Horse, 4 warriors, and 15 women and children who were trapped in a cave at the end of a small canyon. When Crook came up with the main column, he ordered soldiers to positions from which they could fire volleys into the mouth of the cave. And so American Horse and his 4 warriors returned the fire, and after some hours of continuous dueling, 2 bluecoats were dead and 9 wounded. Crook then sent a scout, Frank Groward, to ask the Indians to surrender. Groward, who had lived with the Sioux, spoke to them in their language. They told me they would come out if we would not kill them, and upon receiving this promise, they came out. American Horse, 2 warriors, 5 women, and several children crawled out of the cave. The others were dead or too badly wounded to move. American Horse's groin had been ripped open by buckshot. He was holding his entrails in his hands as he came out, Groward said. Holding one of his blood-stained hands, he shook hands with me. Now that particular exchange is part of DeBarth's book. Captain Mills had found a little girl, 3 or 4 years old, hiding in the village. She sprang up and ran away like a young partridge, he said. The soldier, he uses a hunting reference, like a young partridge. The soldiers caught her and brought her to me. Mills comforted her and gave her some food, and then he asked his orderly to bring her along when he went down to the cave where the soldiers were dragging out the Indian casualties. 2 of the dead women were bloody with many wounds. The little girl began to scream and fought the orderly until he placed her on the ground, when she ran and embraced one of the squaws, who was her mother. I told Adjutant Lemley I intended to adopt this little girl as I had slain her mother. Now, that was a practice that had been done for centuries, if not millennia, that the enemy captain or the enemy officer in charge of a slaughter, or in even a, if you will, a justifiable war, found the children of his enemy, he would adopt them. This is an old custom. So a surgeon came to examine American Horse's wound. He pronounced it fatal, and the chief sat down before a fire, holding a blanket over his bullet-torn abdomen until he lost consciousness and died. He bled out. Crook ordered Captain Mills to ready his men for a resumption of the march to the Black Hills. Before starting, Mills said, "Adjutant Lemley asked me if I really intended to take the little girl. I told him that I did. When he remarked, 'Well, how do you think Mrs. Mills will like that?' It was the first time I had given that side of the matter a thought, and I decided to leave the child where I found her." And that is documented, of course, in Mills' own book. And while 3 Stars was destroying American Horse's village, some of the Sioux who had escaped made their way to Sitting Bull's camp and told him about the attack. Sitting Bull and Gall, with about 600 warriors, immediately went to help American Horse, but they arrived too late. Although Sitting Bull launched an attack on Crook's soldiers, his warriors had so little ammunition that the Bluecoats held them off with their rearguard actions while the main column marched on to the Black Hills. And when the warriors were all gone, Sitting Bull and his warriors went into the American Horse's devastated village, rescued the helpless survivors, and buried the dead. "What have we done that the white people want us to stop?" Sitting Bull asked. "We've been running up and down this country, but they follow us from one place to another." And this, by the way, was from the U.S. Secretary of the Interior report in 1877, the next year. It's where that quote was made by Sitting Bull. And in an effort to get as far away from the soldiers as possible, Sitting Bull took his people north along the Yellowstone River, where buffalo could be found. And in the moon of the falling leaves, Gall went out with a hunting party and came upon an army wagon train traveling through the Yellowstone country. The soldiers were taking supplies to a new fort they were building where a Tongue River flowed into the Yellowstone. Fort Keogh, named for Captain Miles Keogh, who was killed at the Little Bighorn. Might be Keogh, K-E-O-G-H, Keogh. Now, Gall's warriors ambushed the train near the Glendive Creek and captured 60 mules. As soon as Sitting Bull heard about the wagon train and the new fort, he sent for Johnny Brugier, Brugier, B-R-U-G-H-I-E-R-E, Brugier, and a half-breed who had joined his camp. And Brugier knew how to write.
design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, welcome back. Thanks for sitting on through the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, and join the other Intrepids in the live chat room that's going on right now. And you can join in the lively discussion and comment on what we're talking about tonight, or get to know some of the people over there. You are welcome to come over and take a peek. Now, we left off with Sitting Bull having the half-breed Johnny Brugier, Brughire, I think is the way it's pronounced, Brughire, write a letter to the commander of the soldiers after we'd seen all of what was taking place in the prior segment tonight. He said this. He said, "I want to know what you're doing on this road. You scare all the buffalo away. I want to hunt in this place. I want you to turn back from here. If you don't, I will fight you again. I want you to leave what you have got here and turn back from here. I am your friend." That's what Sitting Bull had written. And this document, by the way, is, you can find this on the U.S. War Department, Military Division of the Missouri, the record of engagements with hostile Indians dated 1882. So it was written, it was included, this letter, in those documents several years later. So Sitting Bull didn't want to fight at all. And when Lieutenant Colonel Elwell Otis, commanding the wagon train, received the message, he sent a scout with a reply to Sitting Bull, and the soldiers were going to go to Fort Keogh, and Otis said that many of the soldiers were coming to join them. If Sitting Bull wanted to fight, the soldiers would give him one. Sitting Bull didn't want that. He only wanted to be left alone to hunt buffalo. He sent a warrior out with a white flag asking for a talk with the soldier chief. Now, by this time, Colonel Nelson Miles and more soldiers had overtaken the train. Now, as Miles had been searching for Sitting Bull since the end of summer, he immediately agreed to the parley. Coffee. And they met on October 22nd of 1876 between a line of soldiers and a line of warriors. Miles was escorted by an officer and 5 men. Sitting Bull by a sub-chief and 5 warriors. The day was cold, and Miles was wearing a long coat trimmed with bear fur, and from the first moment of his appearance he was Bearcoat to the Indians. That's the name he was given, Bearcoat. And there were no preliminary speeches, no friendly smokes of the pipe. With Johnny Brugier interpreting, Bearcoat began the parley by accusing Sitting Bull of always being against the white man and his ways. Sitting Bull admitted that he was not for the whites, but neither was he an enemy to them as long as they left him alone. Leave me the fuck alone. Pardon my French. Bearcoat wanted to know what Sitting Bull was doing in the Yellowstone country. The question was kind of stupid. But the Hunkpapa chief answered it politely. He was hunting buffalo to feed and clothe his people. Bearcoat then made a passing mention of a reservation for the Hunkpapas, but Sitting Bull brushed it aside. He would spend the winter in the Black Hills, he said. The parley ended with nothing resolved, but the 2 men agreed to meet again the next day. So the second meeting quickly became a succession of disagreements. Sitting Bull began by saying that he had not fought the soldiers until they came to fight him, and promised that there would be no more fighting if the white men would take their soldiers and forts out of the Indian country. Bearcoat replied that there could be no more peace for the Sioux until they were all on reservations. At this, Sitting Bull became angry. He declared that the Great Spirit had made him an Indian, but not an agency Indian, and he did not intend to ever become one. He ended the conference abruptly, returned to his warriors, and he ordered them to scatter because he suspected that Bearcoat's soldiers would try to attack them right there on the spot. And the soldiers did open fire, and once again the Hunkpapas had to start running up and down the country. By springtime of 1877, Sitting Bull was tired of running. He decided there was no longer room enough for white men and the Sioux to live together in the Great Father's country, and he would take his people to Canada, to the land of the grandmother, Queen Victoria. So before he started, he searched for Crazy Horse, hoping to persuade him to bring the Oglalas to the grandmother's land. But Crazy Horse's people were running up and down the country trying to escape the soldiers, and Sitting Bull couldn't find them. And in those same cold moons, General Crook was also looking for Crazy Horse. This time Crook had assembled an enormous army of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. This time he took along enough rations to fill 168 wagons and enough powder and ammunition to burden the backs of 400 pack mules. 3 Stars, Crook's mighty column, swept through the Powder River country like a swarm of grizzly bears, mauling and crushing all Indians in its path. And the soldiers were looking for Crazy Horse, but they found a Cheyenne village first. Dull Knife's village. The most of these Cheyenne had been in the Little Bighorn. Most of these Cheyenne had been part of the Bighorn Battle, the Little Bighorn Battle, but they had slipped away from Red Cloud Agency in search of food after the army took possession, and there stopped their rations. General Crook sent Three Fingers Mackenzie against this village of 150 lodges. And it was in the Deer Rutting Moon. What an apt title. The Deer Rutting Moon. And very cold with deep snow in the shaded places and ice-crusted snow in the open places. Mackenzie brought his troopers up to attacking positions during the night, and they struck the Cheyenne at first light. The Pawnee mercenaries went in first, charging on the fast ponies Mackenzie had taken from the reservation Sioux. They caught the Cheyenne in their lodges, killing many of them as they came awake. Others ran out naked into the biting cold, the warriors trying to fight off the Pawnee and the onrushing soldiers long enough for their women and their children to escape. Some of the best warriors of the Northern Cheyenne sacrificed their lives in those first furious moments of fighting. One of them was Dull Knife's oldest son. Dull Knife and Little Wolf finally managed to form a rear guard along the upper ledges of a canyon, but their scanty supply of ammunition was soon exhausted. Little Wolf was shot 7 times before he and Dull Knife broke away to join their women and children in full flight toward the Bighorns. Behind them, Mackenzie was burning their lodges and all of their goods, all of their belongings. And after that was done, he herded their captured ponies against the canyon wall and ordered his men to shoot them all down, just as he had done to the ponies of the Comanches and the Kiowa in Palo Duro Canyon. For Dull Knife's Cheyennes, their flight was a repetition of the flight of Two Moons' Cheyennes. After the surprise attack in March by the Eagle Chief Reynolds, but the weather was colder, they had only a few horses and scarcely any blankets or robes or even moccasins. Like Two Moons' people, they only knew one sanctuary, Crazy Horse's village on Box Elder Creek. And during the first night of flight, 12 infants and several old people froze to death. The next night, the men killed some of the ponies, disemboweled them, and thrust small children inside to keep them from freezing. The old people put their hands and feet beside the children, and for 3 days they tramped across the frozen snow, their bare feet leaving a trail of blood. And then they reached Crazy Horse's camp. Crazy Horse shared food, blankets, and shelter with Dull Knife's people, but warned them to be ready to run. The Oglalas did not have enough ammunition left to even stand and fight. Bearcoat Miles was looking for them in the north, and now 3 Stars Crook was coming from the south. To survive, they would have to keep running up and down the country. And this, by the way, folks, is what conquest looks like. The United States didn't acquire the Wild West, as it were, out of goodness and good trades and purchases. They acquired it by conquest. And that's what this whole series is about, the conquest of the American West. And you can see, even here, just in these statements, they had to keep running because the soldiers were coming from all directions now, looking for them. So in the moon of popping trees, Crazy Horse moved the camp north along the Tongue to a hiding place not far from the new Fort Keogh, where Bearcoat was wintering his soldiers. Cold and hunger became so unbearable for the children and the old people that some of the chiefs told Crazy Horse it was time to go and parley with Bearcoat and find out what he wanted them to do. Their women and children were crying for food. They needed warm shelters they could not have to run away from. Crazy Horse knew that Bearcoat wanted to make prisoners of them on the reservation, but he agreed that the chiefs should go if they wished to do so. He went with the party, about 30 chiefs and warriors, to a hill not far from the fort. 8 chiefs and warriors volunteered to ride down to the fort, one of them carrying a large white cloth on a lance. As they neared the fort, some of Bearcoat's mercenary Crows came charging out. Ignoring the truce flag, the Crows fired point blank into the Sioux. Only 3 of the 8 escaped alive. Some of the Sioux watching from the hill wanted to ride out and seek revenge on the Crow, but Crazy Horse insisted that they hurry back to the camp. They would have to pack up and run again. Now that Bearcoat knew there were Sioux nearby, he would come searching through the snow for them. And the white flag of truce meant absolutely nothing. Bearcoat caught up with them on the morning of January 8th of 1877 at Battle Butte, and he sent his soldiers charging through foot-deep snow. Crazy Horse had but little ammunition left to defend his people, but he had some good warrior chiefs who knew enough tricks to mislead and punish the soldiers, while many of the main body of the Indians escaped through the Wolf Mountains toward the Bighorns. Working in concert with Little Big Man, Two Moon, and Hump decoyed the troops into a canyon. For 4 hours they kept the soldiers, who were encumbered with bulky winter uniforms, stumbling and falling over ice-covered cliffs. Snow began sifting down during the engagement, and by early afternoon a blizzard was raging. This was enough for Bearcoat. He took his men back to the warmth of Fort Keogh. And through the screen of sleety snow, Crazy Horse and his people made their way to the familiar country of the Little Powder. And they were camped there in February, living off what game they could find. When runners brought news that Spotted Tail and a party of Brulé were coming from the south, some of the Indians broke in the camp and thought that perhaps Spotted Tail at last had tired of being told what to do on his reservation and was running away from the soldiers, but Crazy Horse knew better than this. During the cold moons, 3 Stars Crook had taken his men out of the snow into Fort Fetterman, and while he was waiting for spring, he paid a visit to Spotted Tail and promised him that the reservation Sioux would not have to move to the Missouri River if the Brulé chief would go as a peace emissary to Crazy Horse and persuade him to surrender. That was the purpose of Spotted Tail's visit to Crazy Horse's camp. And just before Spotted Tail arrived, Crazy Horse told his father that he was going away. He asked his father to shake hands with Spotted Tail and tell him the Oglala would come in as soon as the weather made it possible for women and children to travel. Then he went off to the Bighorns alone. Crazy Horse had made up his mind, had not even made up his mind yet, whether he would surrender. Perhaps he would let his people go while he stayed in the Powder River country alone, like an old buffalo bull cast out of the herd. and when Spotted Tail arrived, he guessed that Crazy Horse was avoiding him. He sent messengers out to find the Oglala leader, but Crazy Horse had vanished into the deep snows. Before Spotted Tail returned to Nebraska, however, he convinced Bigfoot that he would surrender his Minneconjous, and he received promises from Touch the Clouds and 3 other chiefs that they would bring their people to the agency early in the spring. And on April 14th, Touch the Clouds, with a large number of Minneconjou and Sun Arcs from Crazy Horse's village, arrived at the Spotted Tail agency and surrendered. A few days before this happened, 3 Stars Crooked sent Red Cloud out to find Crazy Horse and promised him that if he returned, he would have a reservation in the Powder River country. On April 27th, Red Cloud met Crazy Horse, told him of the 3 Stars' promise. Crazy Horse's 900 Oglalas were starving. The warriors had no ammunition, and their horses were thin and bony. The promise of a reservation in the Powder River country was all that Crazy Horse needed to bring him into Fort Robinson to surrender. The last of the Sioux war chiefs now became a reservation Indian, disarmed, dismounted, with no authority over his people, a prisoner of the army, which had never defeated him in battle. Yet he was still a hero to the young men, and their adulation caused jealousies to arise among older agency chiefs. Crazy Horse remained aloof, he and his followers living only for days when 3 Stars would make good his promise of a reservation. Only for the day, they lived only for the day when 3 Stars Crook would make good his promise of a reservation for them in the Powder River country. So late in the summer of 1877, Crazy Horse heard that 3 Stars wanted him to go to Washington for a council with the Great Father. Crazy Horse refused to go. He could see no point in talking about the promised reservation. He had seen what happens to chiefs who went to the Great Father's house in Washington. They came back fat from the white man's way of living and with all the hardness gone out of them. He could see the changes in Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, and they knew he saw, and they did not like him for it. In August of 1877, news came that the Nez Perce, who lived in the Shining Mountains, this is up in the northwest of the United States now, who lived beyond the Shining Mountains, were at war with the Bluecoats. At the agencies, soldier chiefs began enlisting warriors to do their scouting for them against the Nez Perce. And Crazy Horse told the young men not to go against those other Indians far away, but some would not listen, and allowed themselves to be bought by the soldiers. And on August 31st, the day these former Sioux warriors put on their blue coat uniforms to march away, Crazy Horse was so sick with disgust that he said he was going to take his people and go back to the north to the Powder River country. When 3 Stars heard of this from his spies, he ordered 8 companies of pony soldiers to march to Crazy Horse's camp outside Fort Robinson and arrest him. Before the soldiers arrived, however, Crazy Horse's friends warned him they were coming. Not knowing what the soldiers' purpose was, Crazy Horse told his people to scatter and then set out alone to Spotted Tail's agency to seek refuge with his old friend Touch the Clouds. The soldiers found him there, placed him under arrest, and informed him they were taking him back to Fort Robinson to see 3 Stars. Upon arrival at the fort, Crazy Horse was told that it was too late to talk with the 3 Stars that day, and he was turned over to Captain James Kennington and one of the agency policemen. Crazy Horse stared hard at the agency policeman. He was Little Big Man, who had not so long ago defied the commissioners who came to steal Pahasapa. The same Little Big Man who had threatened to kill the first chief who spoke for selling the Black Hills. The brave Little Big Man who had last fought beside Crazy Horse on the icy slopes of the Wolf Mountains against Bearcoat Miles. Now the white men had bought Little Big Man and made him into an agency policeman. As Crazy Horse walked between them, letting the soldier chief and the little big man lead him to wherever they were taking him, he must have tried to dream himself into the real world, to escape the darkness of the shadow, in the shadow world in which all was madness. They walked past a soldier with a bayoneted rifle on his shoulder, and they were standing in the doorway of a building. The windows were barred with iron, and he could see men behind bars with chains on their legs. It was a trap for an animal. And Crazy Horse lunged away like a trapped animal, with Little Big Man holding on to his arm. The scuffling went on for only a few seconds. Someone shouted a command, and then the soldier guard, Private William Gentles, thrust his bayonet deep into Crazy Horse's abdomen. Crazy Horse died that night, September 5th of 1877, at the age of 35. At dawn the next day, the soldiers presented the dead chief to his father and mother. They put the body of Crazy Horse into a wooden box, fastened it to a pony-drawn travois, and carried it to Spotted Tail Agency, where they mounted it on a scaffold. All through the drying grass moon, mourners watched beside the burial place. And then in the moon of falling leaves came the heartbreaking news. The reservation Sioux must leave Nebraska and go to a new reservation on the Missouri River. And through the crisp, dry autumn of 1877, long lines of exiled Indians driven by soldiers marched northeastward toward the barren land. And along the way, several bands slipped away from the column and turned northwestward, determined to escape to Canada and join Sitting Bull. With them went the father and mother of Crazy Horse, carrying the heart and bones of their son. At a place known only to them, they buried Crazy Horse somewhere near Chunkpee, Opiwakpala, the creek called Wounded Knee. That's where D. Brown got the title of his book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. There's a native song here, and I wish I could sing it. I don't know how it's supposed to sound, but Ikiwakse, and I'm pronouncing this badly, Weankon he wenaha, he na le yelo, he ayotie ki yaweo. And the song says, a warrior I have been, now it is all over, a hard time I have. And that was the end of the fight for the Black Hills and the end of Crazy Horse. Now, Sitting Bull has gone north into Canada, and there's more to his story. But this is how Crazy Horse came to his end. And he never had his photo taken, so nobody ever knew what he looked like. I think many of you have seen this, but I'm going to share this with you now. This is a sketch that I did of Crazy Horse based on verbal descriptions that were given of him, and based on what I know that Native American young men looked like during that day, what Sioux young men looked like. And I did this sketch of him, and hopefully it will... Here we go. Here's my final sketch that I did of Crazy Horse. Here. Boom, and it's very big, so let me bring it down in size to fit this window for you. Crazy Horse is somebody who eluded captivity all the way until the very end. He was a warrior who fought for his people, a freedom fighter, if you will. There he is. That is my rendition of crazy horse. Those of you listening audibly cannot see this, but somebody had said my version looked a little too Nordic, so I went in and I raised the cheekbones a bit and narrowed the bridge of the nose and widened the mouth. And he always wore the stone earring you can see in this picture beneath his hair. And so that's the sketch I did of Crazy Horse, who has never allowed himself to be photographed. And he was killed by bayonet while attempting to not be brought into a jailhouse. And then he died. And they buried his heart somewhere along the way, along the Wounded Knee River. And that's why Wounded Knee stood as a place, if you remember, in the 70s, the standoff at Wounded Knee. They did this at the site where the last, really, about 14, 15 years later, the ghost dance and the slaughter of the people who had gathered to do the ghost dance at Wounded Knee. That's why this site has such significance. So, for now, we've only got a few minutes left, but we're going to move into, in our next segment, the flight of the Nez Perce. The Nez Perce were up in the northwest of the country. You're talking Oregon and Washington State, up in the northwest territory of the United States. And now the United States government and the Army is going to move against them. You have to cross, I believe you have to cross the Bitterroot Mountains to get there. And the Bitterroots, which is this long expanse mountain range going into the west. And, you know, that reminds me of the Bitterroot Mountains. Makes me think of Lewis and Clark and their expedition in the early 1800s. And the Bitterroots, I'm looking for a good photo I want to share with you of the Bitterroot Mountains. This is a very long panoramic view here, but I'm going to show you these mountains. And the Bitterroot Range lay between, it's part of the Rocky Mountains, of course, but it lay between, in the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 1800s, and this was, by the way, this is about 70 years before the Little Bighorn battle. And let's find this for you, the Bitterroots. This is where Meriwether Lewis, who historically, now they didn't diagnose these things like this back then, but they believed that Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Meriwether Lewis, that he was most probably a manic depressive. Now here you see, here is the Bitterroot Mountains. Now this is the site that Meriwether Lewis would have seen. He thought they were very, very close to finding that northwest passage to the Pacific Ocean. And he thought up over a ridge that they would surely see the ocean on the horizon. And with great exuberance and enthusiasm, he climbed up to the ridge and got to the top, and his men down below saw him sink to the ground. And there he sat in despair, because this is the view he saw. After all their travail and everything that had brought them thus far, this was the Bitterroot mountain range that he saw laying before him, mile after mile after mile of snow-capped mountains, when he thought they were going to see the ocean by then. And so this is the silver-topped mountains that was being spoken of in this last segment. And this is beyond these mountains where the Nez Perce lived, in the Washington Territory. And so that's what we're going to cover now, next time we meet. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating. I appreciate you being here and taking your time to listen to me talk. We'll see you after a 23-hour break right back here. Sit tight, and we'll be back.